You'll hear a lot of bad news in this presentation, but there's also some good news, and the good news I call the convenient truth. Our hopes have been dashed before, but we hope we're emerging from a pandemic that's killed about 1 million Americans and over 6 million worldwide. We rarely hear about the role of animal foods in the pandemic. First of all, like virtually all pandemics, this one is zoonotic, meaning it started with animals, most likely a bat that infected another animal at a wet market in China, or possibly a bat that was carried, I'm guessing against its will, into a research lab. Second of all, COVID targeted the obese and those with comorbidities. Another way of saying that it killed people who were already made fat and sick by the animal food rich Western diet. But what happens to people who don't eat the rich Western diet yet contract COVID? A study published in the BMJ Journal in June of 21 analyzed 568 cases of COVID in the US and 5 European countries. And they found that those COVID patients who followed a plant-based diet had 73% lower odds of getting severe COVID. Now, a plant-based diet isn't necessarily an optimal low-fat vegan diet. These are just people who ate less meat and less dairy. I heard Dr. Kim Williams, past president of the American College of Cardiology, say many months ago that he was asking around the medical community to see if anyone knew of any vegans who had gotten severe COVID or died, and he hadn't heard of any. I heard him say the same thing just again recently. Dr. Williams has also pointed out that COVID, quote, loves to reproduce itself in the bloodstream when the cholesterol is high. Now let's estimate that 2 to 3% of Americans are vegans, and maybe 1% are on a healthy, whole foods, low-fat vegan diet. If 1 million Americans have died of COVID, and those of us who eat a healthy vegan diet are 1% of the population, you'd expect about 10,000 deaths among us. But in fact, maybe, just maybe, there were 0. Now imagine if there was a pill that Pfizer came up with that could lower your risk of severe COVID by 73% or more. Well, there certainly isn't big money in what may well be the best answer to COVID, a low-fat, whole foods, vegan diet. Now, have our leading lights of the pandemic ever mentioned nutrition to prevent severe COVID? Did you ever hear Dr. Anthony Fauci or Surgeon General Vivek Murthy or CDC Director Rochelle Walensky ever mention that you could reduce your risk of severe COVID by not eating meat, not eating dairy, and practicing a low-fat vegan diet? I mean, surely that BMJ study crossed their desks. Why wouldn't they mention its findings if doing so could have potentially saved hundreds of thousands of lives? Even a mere plant-based diet gives a 73 reduction in severe COVID. So that's over 700,000 lives that could have been saved if everybody followed that advice. So let's analyze it. When a solution to a terrible problem like the pandemic has 0 costs, 0 side effects, or rather only positive side effects that will save even more costs and more lives, it could be implemented immediately and spare at least 73% from severe COVID and death, why wouldn't any of these people at least mention it? Now, there are only a few possible reasons as I analyze it. The first reason can't possibly be it. They're not fools. These are highly intelligent individuals. Second reason, well, in med school, nutrition is not taught. They went to med school, so maybe in med school they learned to disregard nutrition. But with so many lives at stake, that's not much of an excuse. Are they secretly making money off COVID drugs? That's nonsense. They're not corrupt. They're trying their best to save lives. So the real reason is reason number 4. They belong to the same culture we do. And they're not about to give any advice, no matter how important, no matter if 700,000 or more lives can be saved, no matter how urgent. if it runs counter to the culture they've grown up in and thrived in. American food is what Americans eat, and that includes a massive amount of animal foods. And the last thing Dr. Fauci or Walensky or Murthy would consider doing is challenging their culture. It's not politically or culturally acceptable to challenge the animal foods in our diet. They don't want to get fired. So nutrition is off the table. Now, let me ask you all if you know who the first vegan in history was. This is the first vegan in history. The first vegan was a caveman who discovered that it's easier to sneak up on a plant. He tried to convince the other cavemen of this, and all we know for sure is that he was not well liked. His bones were discovered scattered at a great distance from the cave, and some of them were chewed upon. Nonetheless, here's why I keep trying to carry out this great man's mission. We face an array of crises in this country, and most are getting worse. We are the fattest population in human history. Think about it, it's quite an accomplishment. We're the fattest, sickest population ever to walk planet Earth. 3/4 of Americans are overweight, more than 40% are obese. I'd like to note that when Barack Obama was elected president, obesity stood at about 35% of Americans. There was a popular cry that all Americans should have health care, and Obamacare was the answer to that cry. Obamacare provided an additional 20 million Americans with health insurance and presumably greater access to medical care. By the time Obama's 8 years were over, obesity stood at 39%. Today, not 20 million, but 30 million Americans have insurance through Obamacare, and obesity stands at 42%. So clearly, going to the doctor isn't a good strategy for defeating obesity, although this doctor may be able to tailor you a flattering suit jacket. At the same time that we suffer from extraordinary planetary history-making obesity, 38 million Americans suffer from food insecurity, including 12 million children. At least 19 million Americans live in food deserts with no easy access to grocery stores. Our climate is punishing us and affecting our health with wildfires of a scope, frequency, and duration that have never been seen before, especially in the American West. Heat domes have settled over cities that have broken temperature records, sometimes by 15 degrees or more. And if we have to escape to shelters, a pandemic isn't the best time to do that. Where did all these crises begin? Is it even possible to identify an underlying cause? That's the kind of question you might discuss with friends over dinner. Some might feel that our problems are caused by failures of our government and politicians. Some around the dinner table might blame the Democrats. Some might blame the Republicans. Some might call climate change a hoax, although nobody is likely to call the obesity epidemic a hoax. Some may blame capitalism or socialism. Some might attribute our crises to overpopulation. But is it possible that the real problem is dinner itself? What we eat is all bound up with our culture. Americans consume 8 billion chickens per year. That's about 25 whole chickens per year per man, woman, and child. That's part of our culture. We have fast food joints and restaurants like KFC, Chick-fil-A, Buffalo Wild Wings. Chicken wings are associating with watching football. Don't ask me why. In the South, you could find fried chicken jubilees and festivals. Turkey is, of course, the bird of choice for Thanksgiving. Hot dogs are for baseball games and picnics. Burger joints are ubiquitous. Ribs are for barbecues. The ice cream truck is an iconic symbol of a summer treat for children. We eat more animal foods per day than your average lion. The world consumed 130 billion pounds of beef in 2020. The US accounted for roughly 21% of that, even though we're only a little over 4% of the world population. So it's impressive. You might say we're punching 5 times above our weight, even as our weight balloons. So who taught us to eat this way? Our mothers did. and our fathers and our extended family, our friends and neighbors. We bond with them from infancy, and that bond begins with breastfeeding. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding, although there is a point at which you should stop drinking milk if you have any self-respect at all. All other mammalian species are smart enough to wean themselves. Rats are weaned at 4 weeks. They have no trouble figuring this out. And yet human adults, believe it or not, actually drink the milk of other species, something they would never do if it involved suckling. Our bonding with our mothers, our fathers, our families leaves us devoted to, accustomed to every aspect of the cultures in which we were raised. And that means that the foods we were fed with love are the foods we remain attached to. To spurn those foods is to defy our parents who nurtured us. Food gets all bound up with parental love, and so our food cultures are as intimate to us, as personal to us, as central to us as our parents. Everyone naturally likes to feel included in, part of, proud of their own culture. And if anything about that culture is insane, we don't notice it. It looks normal to us. If you're looking at this picture thinking, what's wrong with this? It looks normal to me. Then let's think about the whole process that culminates in this parking lot. Grain is grown, often on land that was once forested. And that grain is usually grown in a fertilizer-intensive, pesticide-intensive way that degrades the soil and pollutes the streams and rivers and oceans. And that grain is then transported to cattle in a feedlot. The cattle eat the grain, and they're also fed a lot of fish. Collectively, cows eat more fish than whales eat. They're the planet's greatest ocean predator, and they're also fed chicken shit. I think it's fair to say that cattle also ran as the Earth's leading consumer of chicken shit. Now, if you think that's unfair to the cows, well, they get their revenge because chickens in turn are fed cow manure. So there's a lovely symmetry to industrial animal agriculture. The cattle are pumped up with antibiotics so they can survive their unnatural living conditions and gain weight quickly in order to be transported to slaughter and turned into meat patties that will be slathered with sauces so that you don't have to actually taste the rotting flesh, a taste you could never abide if it weren't for those sauces and condiments and salt and sugar. These burgers will bring on disease and death in humans. People nonetheless line up in cars, spewing their exhaust to give their orders to these air traffic controllers, who in this case are wearing masks not because of the car exhaust, but because of a pandemic that was caused by people on the other side of the world eating animals. If you This is a culture of death and destruction on steroids. This is, in a word, insane. And if this looks normal to you, here's what looks normal to those who grew up in Spain. This happened just yesterday, the running of the bulls in Pamplona. That's a lovely way to spend an afternoon, isn't it? Now notice how it again involves cattle. For some strange reason, humans refuse to leave these animals alone. Here's another cultural insanity. You may not believe this, but there are cultures that actually have royal babies. Photographers can't get enough of them, and people enjoy reading all about them. I'm not making this up. These babies are far more important than all other babies because they are royal babies. There are some more cultural contributions to the world. Baby tossing has been in practice for at least 700 years. Babies are tossed from the top of a temple to men who catch the babies with a blanket. This brings good luck. Finger amputation has been practiced as a form of atonement for one's sins. Ritual killing has been around as long as civilization has. And this is part of our culture. And this is part of our culture. I'm not really sure what stage of the process of turning chicken into chicken nuggets this represents, but either way, ask yourself, how could anyone be insane enough to eat this? Does this carnage look appetizing? And yet people eat this and think this is normal. It's part of our culture. This is something we do at the risk of creating a bird flu pandemic that could wipe out half of humanity. We cram 20 or 30,000 birds together in ammonia-laced giant warehouses, and these are considered cage-free birds. This is also part of our culture. We have mechanized killing. This is normal in our culture. Now, do we slaughter animals because we need to? Very few people ever step into a slaughterhouse, and few would ever want to because it's hell on earth. But is it necessary to slaughter animals? No, we slaughter animals not because we need to, but because eating animals is normal. Our parents who loved us fed us animals. Animal foods are advertised on television. Surely animal foods must be good for us, even though 70 years of nutritional studies haven't produced a single legitimate study demonstrating any benefit to eating flesh. As we eat more and more animal foods, we become a fatter and sicker country, yet we don't make the obvious connection. Now, nothing affects our collective health more than our ability to breathe. And now we face a climate emergency. The last 7 years have been the 7 warmest on record. 2021 was the 7th consecutive year when the global temperature has been more than 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, edging closer to the limit laid out under the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. From the March 18th Washington Post this year, the coldest location on the planet has experienced an episode of warm weather this week unlike any ever observed, with temperatures over the eastern Antarctic ice sheet soaring 50 to 90 degrees above normal. The warmth has smashed records and shocked scientists. Well, climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, right? That's what we hear about. And it is a big factor. The burning of fossil fuels is the second leading cause of climate change, but it is a distant second. The leading cause of climate change is animal agriculture, and that's mostly because of carbon opportunity cost. 37% of the world's non-ice land surface is grazed. If even less than half of that is restored to forests, we can sequester enough carbon dioxide to return us to pre-industrial revolution levels of atmospheric CO2. The signature greenhouse gases of animal agriculture, methane and nitrous oxide, are far more powerful gases than carbon dioxide. Methane is 120 times as powerful. Nitrous oxide is 300 times as powerful. So why are we being misled? Why is animal agriculture rarely discussed? And most of the leading climate spokesmen like Al Gore concentrate solely on fossil fuel burning. There's a visual bias. You can see smokestacks from energy plants and manufacturing plants belching carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air. You can't see the methane and carbon dioxide being produced by 1.5 billion cattle on the planet. And then let's add in the sheep and the goats and the manure from 25 billion farmed animals, which also produces both methane and nitrous oxide. Most of us don't see the lagoons of manure that are fouling our landscape. We don't see the forests that are no longer there, that have been cut down and burned to make room for cows, and the land that has been gradually grazed into desert. In 2021, my friend Dr. Silas Rao published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Ecological Society a paper demonstrating that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 87% of greenhouse gases. He arrived at this figure by estimating that at least 41% of the grazing land could be restored to forests, and by estimating the carbon capture of the soil in those forests, as well as the above-ground vegetation. And his estimate did not include many other important things. He did not include animal respiration from 25 billion farmed animals. He did not include all the carbon going into the air from pasture maintenance fires. These are fires set annually by grazing operations. He did not include the bottom trawling of the oceans by industrial fishing, which kicks up carbon from the bottom of the oceans. He did not include the decreased sequestration from diminished phytoplankton populations due to industrial fishing and diminished sea forests. Now, Seilish didn't include these things because at least the last three of them are, there are no calculations, there are no generally accepted figures of how much carbon is involved with pasture maintenance fires. The IPCC does not monitor this, so these figures are unknown, but they are clearly substantial. And if you include all these factors, the last three of which are very hard to measure, you'll find yourself estimating that animal agriculture is probably responsible for well over 90% of greenhouse gases. But as Dr. Rao undoubtedly felt, once you demonstrate that the number is at least 87%, you kind of hope that that's enough to make people pay attention. This is an image that's on the cover of my book, Food is Climate. The red dots represent the pasture maintenance fires set on just one day. This is a NASA fire map. These fires are set to burn all vegetation that cows don't eat. Nobody is quantifying how much carbon is being released into the atmosphere from these fires, and the IPCC is not factoring in how much vegetation and forest are lost to create grazing land. Now look at the deserts, this patch of brown, from the Sahara in northern Africa across to the deserts in the Middle East, to the Thar Desert in northern India, to the Gobi Desert in China, a 6,000-mile stretch of mostly desert. And we know that it was all forested or was savanna in the past. The Sahara was forested less than 10,000 years ago. So what happened less than 10,000 years ago? Humans began cutting down trees, agriculture was invented, and we began grazing goats and cattle on the land, exacerbating other factors. Humans are clearing the Amazon now for cattle grazing, and one day soon there'll be a big patch of brown in South America called the Amazonian Desert. Is it worth it to cause all this damage for a burger? The bun is made from wheat. You don't need animal agriculture for the bun. You don't need it for the lettuce or the pickle or the tomato or the mustard. All you have to do is replace the beef patty with a portobello mushroom or a bean burger or a soy burger or a lentil burger or any kind of veggie burger. It won't taste so fatty, and in fact, it'll taste better, and your taste buds will quickly learn to appreciate not eating so much fat, and it'll be far healthier. But instead of that, we have the meat industry giving us greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, deforestation and desertification, ocean dead zones, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, and pandemics. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of all those problems. So let's compare social goods. The burning of fossil fuel provides transportation, heating, energy generation, the warming of homes, fuel for cooking, and virtually all manufactured goods. That's a lot of social goods. Now, I'm not here to be an apologist for the fossil fuel industry, but you've got to admit that we've all benefited in many ways from the burning of fossil fuels. Eating animals provides obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, food poisoning, pandemics, noxious lagoons of manure, prolific waste of water and grain, and less food. We call people who raise animals for food farmers. We use this term farmers, but remember, they're actually reducing our supply of food when they feed grain and other food to their animals. So if you define a farmer as a person who grows food, they're not really farmers, are they? They're anti-farmers. There are no social goods associated with animal agriculture. Meat and dairy are slow poisons at best to the human body, and we have less food than we would have if we didn't raise animals for food. So animal agriculture serves absolutely no purpose at all. When you consider that we're destroying the planet for an activity that provides zero benefit to humanity, it only provides harms, it's rather remarkable that we can't seem to stop the insanity. The title of my book, Food is Climate, is a response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken, and the conventional narrative on climate change. So why don't these three leading spokesmen on climate ever acknowledge that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change? Why do they focus almost exclusively on fossil fuels? I've analyzed it, and here are the possibilities. Oh, come on, they're not fools. These are highly intelligent men. They're brilliant men. So why can't they see something so obvious? Are they corrupt? Now, it's true that Al Gore has some cattle on his land, but I can guarantee you he's a multimillionaire, couldn't care less about the comparative peanuts he must be earning from a few cattle on his land. Bill Gates is giving his money away because he's got more money than he could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Early in his career, Paul Hawken turned down a fortune to keep running his small business. He's a man with a great deal of integrity. These men do not have a corrupt bias for their opinions on climate. The reason is they're part of the same culture we are. And so when you're part of a culture that eats meat, you don't question whether or not we need the grazing land or how much carbon dioxide we might sequester if we restored forests. You don't question whether or not we need 25 billion farmed animals on the planet. Just as medical schools don't teach nutrition because they assume that our culture will never change its dietary habits, just as doctors don't ask their patients what they've been eating because they assume that Americans are meat eaters and can never change, just as our leading pandemic spokesman never dare to mention nutrition, even though those on a plant-based diet have a 73% less chance of developing severe COVID, just as the media rarely mentions that pandemics are almost always zoonotic, usually tied to animal agriculture, climate scientists don't challenge land use and the fact that we absurdly dedicate 43% of the non-ice land surface of the Earth to the growing of animals for food. They don't question the destruction of the oceans, 70% of the planet, so that humans can get 3% of their food calories from fish. As long as you don't question these things, as long as they're givens, and of course you have no choice but to focus on fossil fuels. There's nothing else to talk about. So how do we heal this planet? A doctor never dresses and bandages a wound and says, go home and scratch it every day. No, they say, leave it alone and it'll heal. We are self-healing mechanisms. So is the earth. In order to heal the earth, we have to leave as much of it alone as we can. That is the rational way to solve the climate crisis. Leave as much of the earth alone as we can. If we stop eating animals, we could leave more than 80% of the earth alone to heal. 70% of it is the oceans. We need to end industrial fishing. We also need to protect the oceans from plastic and other pollutants, but industrial fishing is what's harming the oceans far more than anything else. If we stop eating animals, we can begin by protecting the oceans. And if we stop eating and exploiting animals, we could add 43% of the non-ice land surface of the earth that we could free up for rewilding, which is enough carbon capture to return us to pre-industrial age levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is land that was grazed in Koresh, India, near the edge of the Thar Desert, and then rewilded. That's the difference 4 years of rewilding can make. Imagine if we allowed that to happen to 37% of the land on Earth that's grazed. It's easy to see why creating secondhand smoke is wrong. When you smoke, you make the air toxic for everybody in the room. People understand this today. The secondhand smoke can cause cancer. That's why smokers aren't allowed to smoke in restaurants anymore. Well, eating meat makes this a secondhand planet. If you eat meat, you're heating, polluting, creating desert upon, and reducing biodiversity upon everybody's planet. Imagine if grizzly bears started walking upright all the time and started to use more and more sophisticated tools. Imagine if they started to chop down trees so they could easily eat the birds in their nests and eat their eggs. Imagine if, as a result of all the predator birds they killed, the world started getting overrun with rodents. We'd get pretty angry at the grizzlies, wouldn't we? We'd say, hey, leave the forests alone. Stop chopping down the trees. Bears aren't supposed to be eating eagles and hawks. Let the eagles and hawks have a place to live. You're screwing up the whole world for the rest of us. You're messing with the web of life. And we would be hypocrites, of course, because that is the message that all other species on Earth would surely like to send to humans. And it's also the message that vegans would like to send to non-vegans. The truth is, the world isn't even big enough for one species that doesn't eat its natural diet. Humans have to return to our natural diet: fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, and seeds. Otherwise, we destroy the planet for ourselves and for all other species on the planet. So we have one diet, our natural human diet, that protects us against heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, inflammatory diseases, food scarcity, water scarcity, climate disaster, deforestation and desertification, ocean destruction, and biodiversity loss. Isn't that convenient? Isn't it convenient that by simply eating human food, by merely returning to the natural human diet, the foods we were designed by nature to eat, we could solve so many of our problems and lead longer and healthier lives? And all that's stopping us from this beautiful transformation is our own cultures. That's the problem, cultures. But wait a minute, aren't cultures a good thing? Of course, we can celebrate cultures, but we have agency. We can say yes to ahimsa, harmlessness, and no to baby tossing. We can say yes to flamenco music and no to bullfighting. We can say yes to fraternity and sorority gatherings and no to hazing. We can say, I love you, Mom and Dad, but you fed me the wrong food. We forgive you. You didn't know better. But we do now. Let's face the reality. There is no place for this in civilized society. And there's no place for this. Or for this. For us as humans, with the world at stake, the ultimate question is, can we grow up already? Okay, these are my latest books. One is on nutrition. It's called Own Your Health. The other one is on the subject that I've just been discussing, Food is Climate, on the climate emergency. There's more information at my website, glenmerzer.com, and I could be contacted through that website